Hi everyone, this is Eric here from Healing Relationship. This is our weekly recorded session where every week I meet with a special guest and we talk about healing, self-empowerment, and of course relationship. I believe that the relationship you have with yourself sets the tones for every other relationship you have. Today I'm very glad to have as my guest Dr. Courtney Paré, or Paré, sorry. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I met Courtney through Instagram and I find her content really useful and really close to the work that I've done. And that's why I wanted to have you today and to talk about maybe more about anxiety and relationship today. But first, let me introduce you.
Awesome.
So Dr. Courtney Pare is a naturopathic doctor and anxiety and relationship coach. Through integrative coaching, she helps people experiencing freedom from anxiety, pain, and resentment following disappointment or heartache. She has learned firsthand that through changing our belief, we can change the direction of our life. And she is passionate about sharing this with others. When not working with clients, Courtney can be found training for obstacle course racing, spending time with her animals, and volunteering as a mental health advocate in her community. Is there anything you want to add to that, Courtney?
I think that pretty much sums it up.
So where are you in the world?
I'm in Richmond, Virginia.
Great. So I'm very curious, how did you get into that field? How did you became an anxiety relationship coach?
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in medicine and health and wellness in some way, but the traditional pharmaceutical route really didn't resonate with me. So I came across naturopathic medicine, which is more holistic healing, herbs, homeopathy, and that sort of realm, and that really resonated. So I pursued that route. And then when I was in medical school, I actually my personal anxiety started to increase quite a bit. So I've struggled with anxiety for a large part of my life. And I noticed that when I was in school that a lot of my colleagues were really opposed to working with people who were struggling with their mental health. And a lot of times if someone came on the schedule and they had any form of mental health concern, my classmates would be like, oh, I took the crazy one last time, it's your turn. And to me that, you know, for a couple of reasons. One was that I was feeling people were coming in for help and even medical professionals didn't necessarily want to support them, which was sad and disheartening. But also from my point of view, I felt like I was struggling with that on my own. And so I felt like it took a little bit of either if I opened up about what I was going through that I would be discredited or that people wouldn't take me seriously. And so as I worked through that and worked through my own stuff, I realized that we have to start speaking out more about this. We have to give people a safe space to explore that. And I felt like what better person to do it than me, because I feel like I have a really unique aspect or like perspective on that, where the medical professional in that realm, but I've also have lived experience with it, which I can relate, I think, and empathize in a different way.
That's great. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So Courtney, let me ask you the first question. How do we know that we are suffering from anxiety?
Well, that's a great question. So I think that so we all have anxiety. So every human being has some form of anxiety. So anxiety itself is not something wrong with us. It's not a negative thing. It's actually a really innate response from the body that helps us to live and survive. And so we all experience anxiety. Anxiety is just, there's a threat coming and our body responds to a forthcoming threat that says, look, you need to get out of the way. You need to do this. We need to run to survive. Where it becomes a problem is when that healthy response starts to be triggered by things that aren't a threat. So when our body starts seeing things as threatening that may or may not be threatening. So for me, one of the things that I've really struggled with is social anxiety. And so, you know, if I'm in the forest and a bear is running at me, I would feel anxiety like anybody would, and that would be a good thing. I'll run away. This is really scary. We need to survive. Well, when I'd be in a room of people, I would get that same trigger of like a bear is coming at me. I need to run away. I need to fight. I'd be in that fight or flight. So if you're experiencing or somebody is experiencing either like physical symptoms like a high heart rate or sweating or just like panting or just feeling like they're avoiding certain things, where they feel like this isn't really a life or death situation, but in some way it's feeling that way, that could be an indication. So it can be really subtle. It could just be making excuses as to why you don't want to go somewhere. It could be ruminating about certain things afterwards, but it's basically any time that the situation really isn't threatening, but you feel as though it might be, that could be an indicator that you have anxiety. So in like the relationship realm, how it shows up for a lot of clients of mine is it's like, let's say you're having a good day, you go home and your partner, you walk in the door and your partner is looking at you with their arms folded. Immediately we might go into, what did I do wrong? What did they think about me? They're going to break up with me. That could be an indicator of somebody struggling with anxiety, because a healthy relationship, it would just be like, oh, this is interesting. Let me talk about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very glad that you brought up to this discussion social anxiety, because I think it's really something that increased in the last few years, or the last 10 years or 20 years, and I also talk about to a lot of people who are suffering about social anxiety. So what is it exactly? Why some people just suffer about social anxiety?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of, I mean, I don't know the exact reason, but I think that there's a lot of factors that go into it. So there's a lot of societal expectations, I think, of wanting to be liked, wanting to be accepted, especially with the boom in social media nowadays, where just like how many likes you're getting or how many followers mean something about your worth. I think that even though that's not really true, I think that's how people perceive it. So that's one piece, but also that we're doing a lot more communication through electronics, where we don't actually have as much face-to-face time anymore. And a lot of people, at least who I work with, sometimes feel safer like behind a phone or behind a computer, but then when it's face-to-face, it's scarier. There's a lot more things to think about too. It's kind of body language, or what are they, what do I say, or I said the wrong thing, and you have to face that and kind of work through it. And so I think social anxiety just in general is a preoccupation with what other people are thinking about you. And what's really interesting about this is, like you said, so many people have this, that I could be worrying about what you're thinking about me, and chances are you're worrying about what I'm thinking about you. And the problem, or the biggest issue really here, is that we're not in the present moment, right? We're not able to really connect. We're not able to really enjoy the present moment because we're so concerned with either something I said, what someone's going to think of us. And like I mentioned before, it can also kind of carry over sort of behavior of needing to reach out for reassurance, that kind of thing can play a big role in social anxiety.
Okay. So what do we do when we suffer about that anxiety, whether it's social anxiety or whether it's anxiety that you described like in a relationship? What do we do? How can we overcome that?
Yeah. So I think the first piece really that I know I needed to work on personally, and I really encourage everybody to work on, is acceptance of I know this is what I struggled with for quite a long period of time, and we hear a lot still on how to overcome anxiety or how to beat anxiety. And yes, in some way we do want to live a healthy life outside of anxiety, but I think this idea of making anxiety the enemy or feeling like we have to beat it becomes problematic. Because, so for me, I still have anxiety. I still have quite a bit of anxiety, but I choose to live with anxiety. I choose to not let anxiety call the shots anymore in my life. And so if we can come to a place of saying, that does make me anxious, but I'm willing to do it anyway, that can make a big difference. So I think the first thing is accepting that the goal isn't to eliminate anxiety. The goal is to continue to move forward with goals and values and dreams alongside anxiety. And then over time, your brain doesn't start to give the same trigger. Because let's say that you are afraid around people, right? Then you avoid those people, the brain's going to continuously get the message of, oh, it's scary around big crowds, so let's avoid big crowds. If you say, it is kind of scary around crowds, I'm nervous, but you go and you realize I've survived. The next time it happens, the brain might say, we're afraid of crowds. You go and it happens. Eventually the brain's going to get the message like, all right, well, I keep warning you, you keep going anyway, maybe this isn't as big of a threat. So that's how it works. It's really about reprogramming the brain. But if we're thinking anxiety is kind of the enemy or something that we have to overcome, it leads to more avoidance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And I think it's like everything else in life, the more we resist about something, the more it persists.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So So would you say in your experience that anxiety has a positive intention?
Oh, would I say that it has a positive intention?
Yeah.
I would, yes, I would, especially at least when it starts out. So I don't believe that anything that our body is doing for us is has a negative intent or ill will. I mean, we all have just this innate ability to survive, and just from a species standpoint, this vitalistic standpoint, that our body wants to heal, right? It's just like if you fall down and cut your knee and you start bleeding, your body's not going to let you bleed out. It's going to scab over. It's going to send healing cells. It's the same thing with anything. Your body just wants to survive. And so anxiety is a coping mechanism. Anxiety is something that developed, and then for whatever reason, it worked at some point, and then it just gets stronger and stronger. And we, again, then perceive threats that might not be threats as threatening. And so often, this goes back to childhood, or goes back to sometime early on in life. It's sort of like a wounded child kind of work of when you're a child, we need to survive. We need our parents to survive, right? We need adults to survive. We can't, as an infant, we really wouldn't make it on our own. And so we look for anything that we possibly can to survive. And so if the only way that we can do that is realizing, oh, this is scary, and this is scary, and this is scary, and this is what keeps me safe, over time, our body is going to adapt to that. But then as an adult, we can start to see, wait a minute, maybe now that I'm adult, I have more wisdom. I can fend for myself. I don't need to be safe in that same way as I was when I was a child, but the brain's already developed that, right? And so now it's about retraining the brain. And the way to do that is through compassion, and not so much through beating ourselves up. And I know I would do this. I was angry at myself for being anxious, and then it would make me more anxious and more depressed. And it was kind of just this cycle. And I heard this beautiful quote, and I don't know who it's by, but that you can't hate yourself into a version of yourself you can love. And that just really hit me deeply, because that's really what I was doing, and what I see so many people do. Like, I'm so stupid. Why would I do that? And we're expecting to wake up one day and just love ourselves. And it really has to start with acceptance and forgiveness. And then I think as that translates over into relationships, when we're beating ourselves up so much and we really don't love or accept ourselves, it's very hard to have that deep connection with somebody else.
Yeah. So you talked a few times about self-worth, and I'm wondering, so if we talk about how anxiety comes up in people's life, is there like one core belief? Have you noticed one main general core belief behind that?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've noticed one core belief. It's usually one of a couple, like I'm not enough, right? I'm unlovable. It typically is one of those of just either I'm not enough, I'm unworthy, or I'm unlovable is usually the ones that it comes down to. But there can be, with belief work in general, sometimes it can be one and then kind of peel it back. It's like, okay, what's actually underneath that belief? And then what's underneath that belief? And then it's like what you're saying, usually it comes down to some form of people just feeling like they are not enough just as themselves, right? They need to be somebody different. They need to perform in a different way. They need to succeed differently, in order to be worthy, rather than going back to that inherent worth of you're a human being and you're deserving of love and respect just because you're here.
Absolutely. And thank you for also bringing up on this conversation, compassion, because I think it's really something that we can use in everything in our life.
Absolutely.
Just accepting our experience and validating our experience just by being okay with that.
Yes.
So like you said, if I suffer from anxiety, doesn't mean that I'm an anxious person, or doesn't mean that it's my identity. It's just my experience. It's what I'm experiencing so far.
Yes.
That make me feel that way.
Yes.
But then deep down, I'm someone else.
Yes.
And as I said in your introduction, you said that we can change our belief and we can change the way we think.
Yes.
In order to have a different experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to say something more about that?
I think that it's, so how I like to look at it is exactly, it's very similar to what you just said, is I like to see it as parts, right? Rather than thinking you have to choose, or we all have to choose to be one person or show up in one way. It's like a kind of like a big pie chart, and right, a little piece of me might be anxious, and a little piece of me is compassionate, and a little piece of me loves animals. A big piece of me loves animals, but so there's all like different parts of me. And so when any situation pops up, it can be like, oh, well, a part of me right now is anxious, right? A part of me does not want to go do this. But another part of me also knows that I'm valuable and knows that I'm worthy and knows that I really do want this. And so it's choosing to side with that part. And so we don't, again, this goes back into, we don't have to eliminate anxiety or fight it. It's just a matter of kind of shining the light on that other part of us that's there. And so I like to think of it, and I've heard this analogy before, of kind of driving a car, whereas my anxiety used to be in the driver's seat all of the time. Now it's in the passenger seat. So it's still there, still with me, but it doesn't get to call the shots. It can tell me its opinion, whatever it wants. It can scream at me. It can tell me I'm going the wrong way, but I'm driving and I get to decide where we're going. And so if I can see it in that way, it's like, I hear you, thank you. And I do, this is where the compassion comes in, is remembering that that voice that's there, that anxiety that's there, is just trying to protect me. It's not out to get me. It doesn't want to harm me. It's just thinking, and that part of me has learned this is scary and this doesn't feel safe. And so it's my job to say, I see you, I hear you, let me teach you a new way. And the only way we can really do that is through forgiveness and compassion for ourselves, is what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can we do, like, if we are in a relationship and if we meet someone and in one of the partner is really anxious, how can we handle that?
If our partner is really anxious?
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things that can go on there. So one is remembering, like, staying on your side of the street, right? So remembering what's your stuff and what's their stuff, because it's very common to be able to take on somebody else's stuff, right? To see our partner's anxiety and take it on as, I must have done something wrong, or they don't like me, or, taking it really personally. And then we tend to get defensive rather than being able to either be helpful toward them or at least stay neutral, right? Then it becomes kind of an argument rather than a discussion in that way. But if our partner does have a lot of anxiety, or we're noticing that, I think it's fine. It's fine to bring it up in a really curious way. So I like to encourage people to be curious rather than to be accusatory and or to feel like they have to fix it, right? Because we're all here to do our own journey. So when we're in a partnership, it can be really helpful to hold a really safe space and like be this beautiful container for our partners to heal, but that is their work. So it's not our work that we have to do. So one could just be keeping it all about I statements in the sense of, I noticed that you are a little bit quiet today. Is there something you want to talk about? Rather than saying like, you're anxious today, what's wrong? Or you're being mean today, what's the matter? Rather than kind of telling them, just sharing your experience. I noticed you were a little bit quiet at dinner today. Is there something you want to talk about? And then it opens the door for them. If they want to, great. And if not, can just be like, okay, well, I would really love to speak with you. I'm here when you're ready. And then that's it. Now, if this becomes a long-term problem, obviously it could be, then we need to take a look at, is this relationship really working for me? Because our needs need to be met as well. But in the beginning, really just remembering this is my partner's stuff that's going on. How can I be supportive while still holding my boundaries and while still protecting myself? Because we can't lose ourselves to our partner, because then resentment tends to build up, and resentment and defensiveness is not a healing environment for either party.
Okay, so the first thing is to be really supportive and to try to hold a space for the other partner.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, and because you have experienced that, so when you are anxious, how do you fulfill your needs? And can you really fulfill your needs, or are you always anxious that something is going to come up?
So I think sometimes I'm better than others at that, and I've learned. I'm continuously learning to get better at that of what's helpful for me. So in the beginning, like maybe 10 years ago when I really started, even 5 years ago when I started down this healing path of really recovering from my anxiety, I was very, I guess, needy, for lack of a better word. I really was seeking external validation all of the time. So whether it was professionally through therapists or coaches, or through family members or friends, or particularly my partner, I would everything. Like I needed them to meet all of my needs. If I was anxious, I needed them to tell me that they loved me. I needed them to tell me it was all okay. If we had an argument, I needed them to say it was okay, 10 times, 20 times before I'd believe them. And so everything was very externally validated for me, which in the moment, it felt okay when I was getting that. But what I started to realize was that I wasn't okay on my own, and I wasn't okay by myself. And so that in turn made the anxiety more. It was this cycle, because it was like, okay, they said we're fine. They said they don't hate me, but now they looked at me the wrong way. Now I need to ask again. And it became this cycle. So now I'm more self-reliant. If I recognize that cycle, I know when that's happening, and I just either do some grounding techniques. So one thing I really like to do is if I'm spiraling, sorry, it's thundering here. It got really dark and the thunder's going on. I will just look around the room and try to find 10 things that are a certain color. Or I will do a quick body scan of just from my head down to my toes of where am I feeling any tension in my body. So anything to bring me back in the present moment, because that helps for me with the physical sensations of anxiety in terms of, am I living in the past or the future? Because I have a tendency to live about everything I've done wrong or everything I will do wrong, and very little about what's going on right now and what have I done well. And so that's something for me that I just remember to bring it back into the present moment. I've been doing better with meditation, which is something that took me a long time to get, but really just sitting for even 5 minutes to just get started and just being with myself, being okay with myself, and welcoming uncomfortable feelings has been really helpful. And then back to kind of what we talked about in the beginning, just allowing anxiety to be there has been the biggest thing for me. I used to feel like, I'm anxious, this isn't okay, I need it to go away. And now when I'm feeling anxious, and I'm like, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm anxious, and I'm also other things. So using what's it called, like a feelings wheel has been really helpful, because I think a lot of times we identify, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm anxious, and we pick one and we're really committed to that. Whereas I like to invite people to say, okay, what else are you, and I do this with my clients quite a bit, and it's amazing how many of them will either be like, I'm just angry, or I'm just sad, and then they look at the wheel and they're like, oh, I also feel a little bit of joy and a little bit of fear. And so realizing that a lot of things can happen at once has been also really helpful for me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing up those mindfulness tools that people can really use. Because I think when we are caught up in situation, when we are at work, or when we're driving, or where we are in the bus, or just with people, we really need some
Yes.
practical tools that we can use in the moment. Absolutely. As you said, to reconnect with the present moments. And say, okay, am I really in danger now? Yes or no?
Yes.
And then we can start again with the normality, let's say.
Yeah. And that's when I like to separate it out. Okay, a part of me is feeling afraid right now, right? A part of me, but then I can also tap into that other part of me of, I also know that I'm safe. I also know I've done this before and I've survived, and and kind of working it through in a more practical way, because anxiety can be it feels real, but it can kind of be unrealistic quite often.
Yeah. I have a question, because in psychology we use the 6 human needs, and one of the psychology need is and it's universal, it's certainty. I want to feel safe, I want to feel that things are predictable, I want to feel that I'm financially safe, and I was wondering, with anxiety, is it always related to certainty?
Most of the time, yes. So I'm big on this certainty piece. I do a lot with obsessive compulsive disorder, and that's a subset sort of anxiety, where people want certainty around things. And the favorite line that we have to use, right? The only thing we can really be certain of is uncertainty, right? The only thing that we know for sure is that we can't know anything for sure. And so I do think that, yes, it has to do with certainty and control is really what I see more of it is this feeling of control. But in fact, the more that we seek control, the more out of control we really get. And this is what's, with anxiety in particular, that's counterproductive, right? Is we think that we're controlling it, right? Okay, I'm afraid around people, so I'm going to not go to that event. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to make sure that I do this, this, and this. And we're thinking that we're in control. But really, if we take a step back, it's like, wait a minute, who's calling the shots here, right? Who's really in control? It's the anxiety, because it's preventing us from actually living out what we want to do. And so embracing uncertainty is a huge, huge, huge part of the recovery process of being able to live alongside anxiety. And this goes back to, the goal isn't to get rid of anxiety. The goal is to say, you know, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable and I'm willing to take that risk anyway. And what makes that more easier to do, not that it's ever really easy, but easier, is when we have strong values and goals and we're clear on our needs. Because if we don't really know what our values are or what we're working toward, if we don't have set goals, then it's less motivating to be able to work through some fears, right? But if we know that we have something we're working toward, then we'll maybe have a little bit more motivation to sit with some of that uncomfort or discomfort and be able to work through that. But yes, sitting with uncertainty and discomfort is absolutely necessary in order to work through anxiety, in my opinion. And this is the one thing people don't really like to hear, and I wish that I could give people, this is how you do it and you work through it, but it is working through the hard, messy stuff, but it is so worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a question for you. What is the best advice you ever received in your life?
Oh gosh, the best advice I've ever received in my life.
Or maybe someone said something to you and it made a big difference in your life.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, what's coming to mind, a couple of this, so there's two really, but one I would say is that really take things day by day, taking things one day at a time. So I would get really caught up in, when am I going to overcome this? Am I ever going to not be depressed or anxious? You know, I have no hope. And somebody once told me, like, it's okay to not have hope. What if you don't have hope and instead you just get curious? What if you don't need to know exactly what the future holds and you just know, I'm curious about what tomorrow brings? And that really made a big difference for me, because along with my anxiety, I would go into very deep depressions and I would feel extremely hopeless. And everyone would just say, hold hope, you know, or be hopeful. Hope is never gone. And I could not find hope in any way in that time. And this was, you know, just in general, but especially when I was going through a really tough breakup of, like, I didn't see how anything was ever going to be different. And people would say, oh, there's someone else better for you out there. And like, I just couldn't grasp that. And then when someone finally said, like, you don't have to have hope. You don't have to think about any of that. You just have to get curious about, I'm curious about what tomorrow brings. That really made a big difference for me, because it took so much pressure off of, like, oh, it's okay for me to be having a bad day. Like, it's okay for me to just be sad. And so it almost gave me permission to just feel. And that made a big difference for me.
Permission to feel. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's great. So I know you're a huge animal lover, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
Because does it help? Does it help you in your life? And
Absolutely.
how does it help?
Yes. So I was going to say, when you asked the previous question about kind of what helps me in my anxiety, that's one of the main coping skills that I have, are really my animals. So I have a dog and I have 2 cats as my personal animals. And my dog's my best friend in the world. And he has helped me so much through just my healing journey. Not only has taught me a lot just about life and myself and just love in general, but it's been really helpful to give me something else to be accountable for, kind of bring me back into the present moment. Animals just live in the present moment. They live like, you know, just, it doesn't matter what happened yesterday. It doesn't, other than eating around 5 o'clock, they let me know what time it is. But other than that, it's just moment to moment. Right. And when I see that, it's like, it helps me to bring back into the moment. And if I'm feeling really anxious or I'm having a tough day and I'm like, I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to go do this, I know that my dog needs to go out. I know my dog needs to eat. Like, and I might not be able to find the motivation to get up for myself, but I am able to do that for him. And then usually once I'm up and like letting him out, I feel pretty good. So it's just been something that's been really helpful for me. And in particular, my dog has a lot of anxiety himself, and I don't know, maybe I passed it on to him. I know there's a lot of that can go on, but seeing it through him has made a big difference for me, of just realizing, like, it's not something that we can necessarily control, that we're still very lovable, even if we have that, right? So it helped with a lot of the stigma. And I just found, like, he's misunderstood quite a bit, because he he has fear aggression because he gets anxious, and a lot of people are like, oh, he's so mean or he's a bad dog. And in seeing that, I was able to really, it almost mirrored how I felt, of like just feeling misunderstood and feeling like, okay, yes, in this instance, he seems like could be mean, but he's also the most loving dog that I know. And that actually, again, kind of gave me permission that, yeah, sometimes I will show up as shy or insecure, but I also know that once I get to know you, I'm actually like really outgoing and not like I show up in that way. And so it just helped me to have more of a perspective, which is really interesting, that I wouldn't think I would get from an animal. But then just animals in general just make me smile and make me feel joy, and anything that I think makes anyone feel joy, that's a big thing that I, do more of it, right? If you smile and it makes your heart happy, get more of that in your life. So for me, that's animals.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a story. I grew up in Paris, in a big city. And I was scared about dog and animals. I got that from my grandmother. But to make a long story short, when I arrived in Canada, my wife has a cat. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how to behave around the cat and anything. But I noticed something is they have a sixth sense. Yeah. Whenever I was feeling down or whenever I was feeling anxious or, worried about something, she would come onto my chest and just pour like for 5 or 10 minutes. Amazing. And it was the first time that I could really experience what it was to be like connected with an animal and with this cat, because I used to be scared of cats, right? Wow. And I could feel that it could really help me, as you said, to bring back myself in the present moment and feel the love, feel the connection that I had with this just little thing in front of me.
That's amazing.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It just makes me so happy, those stories, because there is just something so incredible about that. And my dog, he's as tall as I am when he stands on his back feet. And so I know if I'm crying or I'm really upset, he gets worked up, and it's really hard to stay crying and sad when there's like 80 pounds on top of you licking you. But my cats too, they're really just perceptive of emotions, and it just helps me to feel really cared for and loved. And it's a special bond.
Yeah. Okay, Courtney, we're almost at the end of the interview. Is there anything you want to add before I wrap up?
Gosh, we covered quite a bit actually in this period. Really, just wanting to add that if anybody out there is really struggling from anxiety or working through that in any way, just reminding them they're really not alone, and that the biggest piece is to be able to get support for it. That you don't have to go through it alone. I think for me, that has been the biggest turning point in my life, was finding support to just be able to show up as myself, and it's the right support too. So even if you've tried to open up before and you've got shut down or you feel misunderstood, I would encourage you, people listening to try again, because the right support makes a big difference, and people want to see you succeed. I know that when I was younger, the people who I was around were just confirming my old beliefs, that I wasn't good enough, that nobody liked me. And now that I've done some of the inner work, I realized that was just the people who I was around, because there's now plenty of people who want me to succeed and who really do love me. And so I think that this friendships, but also partnerships too, right? If your partner is not building you up and making you feel like the best version of yourself, and vice versa, thinking about that and really looking deep into that, because every single person deserves to be heard and seen and understood for who they are.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So if people want to reach out and to contact you, how can we find you?
Yeah, so my website, you could reach out to me via my website, which is www.nhsvirginia. It's like Natural Health Solutions Virginia, but NHS. Or as you mentioned, I'm pretty active on Instagram, and it's Dr. Courtney Paré is my Instagram name.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Courtney. Thank you. You have been a great guest, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Likewise. Thank you.
So guys, this is time to finish the interview. And as I always said at the end, if you open your heart, you have all the love you need. So take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week for a new interview. Bye.